Hi, welcome to our fourth part of our four-part series, Marketing Gone Wrong, Are You Guilty? My name is Bob Jameson, VP of the East, and I have Megan. Please introduce yourself.
Megan Bacor, Director of Client Services for the West Coast.
And Chris.
Hey, everybody. Chris Berkey, Director of Client Services for the East.
Thank you, Chris. Just to remind everyone, no one is perfect. So here are some common mistakes to avoid. Last time we went through blindly accepting auto optimizations from Google. This time we're going to go over the aspect of measuring all campaigns and platforms to the same goal. So obviously your website has a variety of functions, right? If you look at all the ones illustrated here, they're all very different, right? A lot of different aspects to them. And you look at email, text sign up versus certain landing pages or lead forms. All of them have different aspects and probably mean something a little different to your business. But what we find is that a lot of the marketing tactics that go along with these don't necessarily jive with the same theme, right? Like if you have all these different functions, why are all your marketing goals kind of based on the be all end all and not necessarily tied to these? You guys have thoughts on this?
I love this slide purely because it reminds everybody that each tactic is really driven or each piece of your website is really focusing on a different piece of the funnel within the consumer journey. Your homepage might have a very generic messaging versus your blog content, which is built to educate your consumers. Taking into consideration and knowing that is very, very valuable piece within your consumer's journey. I think it's just a reminder of that.
Makes sense. And obviously, this kind of is a continuation here. When you think about the variety of functions that could be on the site, the amount of content that a given business puts out and the time that goes into them and where that falls and how do you drive eyeballs there and what is the purpose of that, or video views or newsletter signups, or even creating an account with a given business so you can kind of stay in front of them. These little micro conversions that you can set up along the way are really important. And I mean, I know you guys see them get ignored or at least not prioritized well. Chris, would you mind touching on that?
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing is like there's so much value to all of these, right? And so many times that end goal becomes that just primary focus. Create an account. I mean, that could have a far greater impact on your business over time. That person was willing to take the time to give you personal information and set something up. So they might not buy today, but what they might buy over the next 5 years is huge. And, people are so quick to move away from focusing on something like that. We had an e-com client in our region that did a campaign for all of these things and had substantial growth because they focused on getting people to the site. They saw value in even the content view, right? That's something that seems so basic to so many people, but if you can get somebody to the site, monetize that, find a way to get them back to become a consumer, because that's great. You educated them, but then they also could be that person to be a long-standing customer of yours.
I think something else to add to that on like the newsletter sign up, for example, Berkey, to your point, like they created your account, they created an account, they gave you a piece of information about themselves. Maybe they just need a little bit more education, and your newsletter is a potential way to do that. And if you just end up pushing or measuring your campaigns based off of that last purchase, if you will, and you miss out on focusing on people that sign up for a newsletter, maybe those individuals end up spending a higher dollar amount. Maybe they end up buying an accessory in addition to your primary product. So their lifetime value or their actual average order value might be substantially higher because you push them through that nurture funnel, ensuring that each step along the way has the greatest amount of education and ultimately driving that purchaser. Another piece that I think of is when you optimize or when you're measuring multiple steps within the funnel, you can influence the speed in which that consumer makes it through. So if you just go from 0 to 100, pushing the purchase, you might actually see that takes them 30 to 45 days. Whereas if you were to nurture them along the path, it might actually shorten that funnel from 30 days down to 20, or 20 down to 15. And then in addition to that, getting a higher average order value, it makes that substantially more profitable and more money in your pocket at the end of the day.
Really good
And you
point.
could, yeah, and you could probably do that without offers, right? Because a lot of people, first thing that pops into my head is, oh, Megan, you're asking me to give them an offer to get them to convert quicker. No, it's just giving them information that
Yeah.
could convince them outside of, hey, here's a 15% coupon, but hey, why are these $200 shoes worth picking up right now? Oh, it'll do this for, my run. I can maybe take 15 seconds off a mile, right? That's pretty substantial. What have you, right? Like what can you do to get them in? That's huge.
It's a great point. You don't have to give a discount. You can just educate.
Yeah, and it just kind of illustrates what you guys are talking about. Those micro conversions, those KPIs along the way, are really good, probably for future optimizations, right? Because to Megan's point, like there might be pieces within the mix that could help speed up the consumer journey, based on getting them information at the right time, and being able to look and measure and then make changes based on those little individual pieces, could really help a business, not only, like we said, increase the speed of their customer journey, but really understand their data better, because you're slicing it up in thoughtful ways.
It gives you micro batting averages, right? You could, if it takes 1,000 content views for one purchase, what in there could change that? You find then that you have a huge drop off from a particular content view to a more substantial page. Well, then you can find that place to fix that, and you see, oh, well, native is working really, really well to get somebody to convert. Let's implement that there in the middle of that stage, and you take that 1,000 to 1 to 1,000 to 3, and you've quickly affected change just by having little benchmarks along the way that you can look at to then make tweaks, rather than just have a giant bucket of data with no real way to make changes.
Mm-hmm.
No, it makes sense.
Something that we've seen as well, we did a recent study on one of our brands where looking at that journey along the way, what step drives different pieces of it. And we identified that when a user first is introduced to a brand utilizing video, whether that's standard pre-roll or connected TV, they actually converted 6 days faster. Another study that we did was with the native placement. The average order value when you incorporate native into your media plan ends up being about, I think it was 15 to 20% higher. So they ended up purchasing at least one more product in addition to their standard product. So it really helps build up that brand trust, if you will, by incorporating multiple touch points along that funnel.
Makes sense. And I think, focusing on that KPI at the end, ignoring the journey, but you're almost late to the party, right? Like you're showing up, and a lot of these, a lot of your competitors may have been nurturing this particular prospect along the way, and showing up late to the party doesn't always work out for you. It's the equivalent of showing up to a wedding and trying to steal the bride. I mean, this gentleman's been courting her for quite some time now. You can't just show up and do that. So I think that analogy holds true. In terms of marketing and silos, obviously, this I would say loosely ties to this topic, right? Because not only do you want to make sure that, like Chris, you brought up those micro batting averages, well, you want them to kind of feed each other, right? Or to have some sort of segue, and often they're looked at in by themselves, and not that they might creating an account might move towards a newsletter or other things. They all tend to work together. So I think understanding how those silos are really supposed to bridge together is important, wouldn't you guys say?
I think so. I think it goes back to what Megan was just saying in that that study that they did, right? She was able to look at both pre-roll and CTV and marry that data together to see, okay, both of those are working and doing the same thing, even though they are two separate entities, kind of doing two separate things. We typically look at them at probably different places in the funnel, but it actually gave you the same end result that maybe you were looking for. Or it gave you something that was completely unexpected, and it gives you the opportunity to double down on it, right? So looking at it all together to be like, okay, I'm running 7 different platforms. What are they all doing to get me to that end goal, which is either a purchase or what have you, is huge.
Makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely. And I think something else that we've need to focus on as well is, if you're continuously optimizing towards that end goal of this goes back to one of our earlier fails that we mentioned, of making sure that that communication across the board. If you're just focusing on sales, but then this one platform or one placement, native, pre-roll, connected TV, maybe doesn't drive that last touch purchase, but in that scenario that I mentioned earlier, where it actually influences the user to purchase faster, you would have actually moved your money out of that placement at this point, because hey, I'm not getting the return on ad spend that I want from a last touch perspective. But you miss out on looking at that placement from a larger picture and making sure that you're getting in front of those users. And then at the end of the day, you miss that conversion or you miss that purchaser because you didn't have that channel still deployed.
Really good point. And again, you guys touched on a lot of this, but the reason you want to avoid these types of silos or not having all these KPIs kind of be looked at is it could create limited data insights, inefficient budget allocation, which when it hurts your wallet, it matters, and your bosses will care. The missed cross-channel opportunities, and Megan did a really good job of articulating that on the research they did for a client. A poor customer experience, and even if it's not a poor customer experience, it may not be a great one. And when you guys think about the brands that have wowed you with their customer experience, it's because they almost want to make sure that you're getting taken care of and pampered along the way, in the way that they can pamper you from afar. And then of course it makes you less able to adapt to that change in consumer behavior because you're not necessarily measuring these things. And when Megan brought up that example, maybe she has ways to see when those pieces change, logically what's going to make sense because the data is already there, prior data as well. So I think very good guide there for that piece. So what can you do on this? Well, a couple things. If you guys wouldn't mind walking through these 4 steps, Chris, you could start, and Megan, you could.
Yeah, I think utilizing a centralized data management platform, a dashboard of any sort is certainly a huge help. Gives you the ability to go in, take a look, see if it's set up properly, you can actually get an overarching view of what your spend versus return is. Then gives you the ability to go in, kind of slice and dice, look at things in an individual way, but then it also allows you to then look at it and see how one thing could affect another, which, obviously is always going to help you make those decisions over time.
Great.
Yeah, I think with that piece being said, one of the programmatic platforms that we utilize allows for you to really have that holistic view of all of your programmatic pieces, whether it's pre-roll or native or display. You get that holistic ability to identify what is moving the needle in certain areas. When I mentioned that example earlier of pre-roll driving the purchase 6 days faster, that's a learning because we run it under a single platform instead of having it in silos. And looking at them in silos, you'll over time be able to identify those learnings, and taking it to like a unified marketing strategy, making sure that each level within the funnel has that same message. So if you look at meta prospecting, for example, versus programmatic prospecting, you might have that message be very similar to ensure that the consumer is getting the same customer experience throughout that purchase process. Then leveraging your retargeting across those same channels of meta retargeting versus programmatic retargeting or pre-roll retargeting, you can identify learnings within that as well. Chris, do you want to cover off on the last one with performance and holistic metrics?
Yeah, I think monitoring performance is probably the one of the key takeaways from this, right? You can't just turn a campaign on and not look to it to see what's going on. I mean, that conversation in the last one when we were talking about Google, if we didn't monitor performance, a lot could happen in the wrong way, in waste and lack of conversion that, just digging in there, finding the metrics that matter and finding multiple metrics that matter. Don't, like we were saying, don't just focus on that end piece, but let's build a funnel and let's work it to see how we can grow not only today, but how can we grow the business 6 months, a year, 18 months from now, and keep that momentum going to where success is always the end goal. And it might not just be at the bottom of the funnel. It may also be at the top.
Appreciate you guys walking through that. It was great. Thank you everyone for your time. This concludes part 4 of our 4-part series. And if you haven't seen the other parts, feel free to go to our website and check them out. Thank you for your time.